Have the agenda before you. I have no changes or additions to add this evening and would entertain a motion to adopt. Motion from Roger, is there a second?
Second.
From Buzzy, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, then our agenda is adopted. I do want to just make a quick note. Councilman Bruce Lee had a family conflict and isn't able to be here this evening, and we want to acknowledge and excuse him. Grateful he's able to be a part of those other things that he needs to be doing tonight. Next, you have minutes before you. No minutes this time? Okay. Okay, then without minutes to approve, we'll go to our follow-up and action items. Alan?
Thanks, Mayor. Jumping down through here, the Civic Center RFPs, they were due this Monday of this week. The committee went over those and selected 3 firms for interviews this coming Monday. And so they'll go through and they'll interview those firms. This is the architectural firms that have submitted proposals for the Civic Center. Recruitment, compensation, retention items. We've gone through several of those items. We'll gear up to do that again in the coming months. Jumping down through here, water. Right now we're filling out actually 2 different options for water funding for the features throughout the city. One is through the USDA. The others are through the ARPA funding that are coming down the pike, and also the subsequent infrastructure package that's come out. And so going through each of those is a major priority for us right now. Along with those is sewer. So we're going through the sewer project right now on our major trunk line, working with Logan, putting in a section of that trunk line, which is very expensive right now. Jumping down through here, the streets are preparing, doing last minute things with stormwater, but then preparing the trucks all for plowing and putting that in order. Jumping down through here, engineering, they're preparing kind of the 12th East overlays. We've had discussions with each of the property owners, but putting together an overlay just to show them a little bit more accurately how the 1200 East expansion, the COG project, would affect or could potentially affect several of the property owners' property through there. Obviously, the trunk line project is the other major thing in engineering. Parks, they're doing last minute cleanup, going through everything through the parks, blowing out, winterizing, and doing some master planning right now. Trails, the Bonneville Shoreline Trail is a big component right now. We'll probably go out for proposals on that soon to expand or install a portion of that. Recreation basketball, again, largest signups we've had. We had to cap it at a certain point. We didn't have enough staffing at a certain point or facilities at that point. I think it's almost double the next largest basketball registration in the entire valley. So hats up to Jesse for putting that together. It's silent Santa's for those with disabilities to come, and they have a Santa comes to the RSL facility. And then Letters to Santa is a program where people can write letters to Santa here at the library or the city office. Facilities are doing their safety program where the Utah occupational safety representative comes up and goes through all of our facilities. So they're working with them to make sure that we pass that we go through that. And then some of the repairs done at RSL and here at the library as well are the main projects. Cemetery, one of the major projects is 1, designing the Veterans Monument, but 2, getting secondary water. And so we'll have major discussions in the coming weeks and months regarding the feasibility of that. Community development, we'll touch on 2 or 3 things that they've been working on for several weeks and months. The codes tonight, several items on the agenda, so I won't go over those at length, but they'll continue working through several of those items. Economic Development Master Plan should be ready for the next City Council for approval. And so hopefully I can have that to you in the next week or 2 for review to look at that before it comes before City Council. So you have plenty of time for feedback in that regard. Coming down through, we'll go through several items tonight regarding the audit, and thanks to everyone who's involved in that, especially Scott, the treasurer. But there's a lot of things that we're doing right now and switching over to Polaris that Debbie's heavily involved in. And those items will tie into communication with residents. Actually, the new accounting software helps us communicate more fully with the residents of the community, especially those if we can get it set up in multi-unit housing, plan unit developments, those items. Jumping down through human resources, we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight with the employee handbook. I've already mentioned the audit. The library, they may have the writing contest. They're looking over that. They do have a new programmer. They hired a programmer, so they'll be looking at doing several programs. And then the food for fines is when they can bring in food drive items here at the library, and they'll forgive fines at that point. The police they're working with us on nuisance items, touring, and we're also working together on parking tickets over the winter and looking at different options as to how we can do that with the police department. What the best option is, it's not as clear cut as we had originally thought. So seeing what we can and can't do and trying to make that a little bit easier for both departments. And then fire, they are assisting the Bear Health Department vaccine administration, and so it's been fantastic. Those are the updates I have now, unless there's other specific items that any of the council members have.
Questions from the council on those items, or anything else you'd like updates or clarifications on? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to our recognition of an exemplary staff member. Tonight, we are recognizing Scott Bennett, who is our city recorder. City recorder is an interesting one. There's only 2 jobs in the city that are legally required. Every city has to have a recorder, and every city has to have a treasurer. Everyone else, well, I guess you have to have a mayor and a city council, but everyone else is expendable. According to state law. And so, but Scott serves that not only the legal definitions of his duties, but also is someone who goes out to just do a great job of everything that's asked of him or required of him. One of Scott's major responsibilities in the city has bearing on, of course, monitoring financial statements, in addition to being, he's our grandma officer and a variety of things, but especially, tis the season for audits in local government. And Scott just does a fantastic job. It takes hours and hours of his time, but he does it very well and is dedicated to making sure that our city is on the right track financially, that we're making the right choices, that appropriate protections are in place, and that the city's financial operations are transparent, open, and consistent with the law. And so tonight we want to recognize Scott for his outstanding work. Please join me in giving a round of applause for Scott's efforts. We'll get Scott a token of recognition here shortly. We used to make everybody come up, but post-COVID, we haven't quite recovered from the from that. So we'll get a little recognition for Scott here soon. Speaking of audits, the first action item on our list is to have the council receive our audit. Diana Cannell is making her annual visit. Well, she's usually here more than once a year, but we're grateful to have someone of her skill in our city and grateful to have her services in auditing and making sure we're doing all right. As is the custom, Diana has brought a box of chocolates that I will open and share around as we receive the audit.
I'm impressed. I told the mayor that he could just like stick them in his bag and take them home, but he's going to share with you, which of course he will.
Does that generate an audit finding if the mayor runs off with the chocolates?
It was a test.
It was a test.
I just really want to say I appreciate all the work that goes into the audit, and thank for all the staff that really spend a lot of time. I know Scott, he's called me multiple times during the year to make sure any new type transaction is handling appropriately, and because of all the hard work he's done and how things ended up this year, there are no audit findings. And I mean, that is a huge accomplishment. And I'm just so pleased to be able to say, I hope that gets well recognized, because it's not only Scott, it's department heads, it's the mayor and council. If you look at all the different state compliance items ranging anywhere from your general unreserved fund balance limitations to making sure all of your budget, all of your funds were within budget, to making sure that minutes are posted appropriately, that everything's on the agenda. that you do a fraud risk assessment. I mean, there's just so many things that the state requires for us to go in and check, and that you passed all of them is just really commendable. So I just want to make sure everybody gets, a good pat on the back from me. It sounds like they are from you as well, but it's exciting when I get to come, and all I really am going to do is just give you some financial highlights, because that's much funner for me. I love numbers. So I'm just going to tell you a few things on the financial statements. It was a solid financial year for North Logan. If you look, the total assets between all of your funds increased over $5 million. And that goes from many different areas. Your cash positions were up, and that related to some of the revenue streams that were up. Your revenue streams with property taxes, sales taxes, grants, such as the CARES funding that you received, as well as charges for services. All of those fees were up. As you continue to have growth within North Logan, those type of things you expect to go up. With the increase in property taxes, it's natural to see that as well. So overall, your revenues went up in total about 2 million, but your expenses only went up about 20,000. So that difference has really helped to make sure that your assets there increased more than your liabilities did. In total, your liabilities between all funds only increased about $1 million, which means your equity position increased about $4 million. So solid financial right there. I'm so sorry. I said your expenses only went 20,000. Your expenses went up 1.7 million. So still less than, of course, because a lot of the CARES funding money that you received in, you're also seeing the corresponding expenses with as well. So, but still net effect on all your funds. I think you had positive net income in every single fund. And one of the things I really look at before I come and talk to you is how are your business type or enterprise type funds doing? Are the fees that you're charging substantiating the expenditures that you have, especially on the operating net income or loss level, and all of your funds have an operating income. If they have a loss in operations, because operations, is before, other things, your interest expense and things like that. But if they're not, then I always want the councils to kind of take a look at that to see if they need to have an increase. But it looks like for this year, all is good. Now, what that means is if you have net income and over a few years, you can save up and thus not have to take out debt as you're doing some of the bigger projects. So I encourage the cities to do that. Set aside those funds when you're having a large project come in, and then you've got your sewer trunk line going. If you have wells coming up, things like that. Sometimes it's hard not to do debt because the expenses are so massive. But whenever you can, save up to not do it. And if you look at your debt positions, mainly you have a note for the RDA. For the phase 2 that went in this year, but otherwise, I think you just have capital leases, if I'm right. So those are just vehicles that you're doing, which is just over a few years. So you're really solid in that way that you're not heavy laden with debt, which gives you a lot more opportunities as you're looking forward to doing infrastructure changes. It was the enterprise funds. If we're looking just at the enterprise, those expenses only went up 18,000 over the year. Revenues went up about 770,000 in total. And there you can see, and that's on page 28. There you can see that your net incomes for all of those are positive for this year, which is great. Just keep in mind, they're different as you're looking at those versus like your general fund or capital improvements. Any given year, those can be negative just depending on the projects that you're doing. In those funds, that when you're looking just at those fund financial statements, the capital outlay runs through as an expense. So any year that you're doing large projects, that can, show a negative. So but the enterprise funds, they run like a business and where you're capitalizing your assets and doing depreciation expense. So it's a better indicator of having a smoother net income line depending on what you're doing. So that is a really high level financial overview. It's a glowing report this year. I'm so happy to be able to give it. But I'm also here if you have any questions on specific funds, on any of the procedures that we do, which are a lot. It probably takes them a full week to put back all the documentation that we request and look at. And I'm happy to go through anything like that you want. I'm here at your disposal.
Cool. Council, questions for Diana?
No findings and everybody just gets real quiet.
That makes it really, really easy. Diana, thank you very much for your help. I want to reiterate Diana's shout out to our staff. Scott puts in a lot of time and effort on these. Marie does wonderful things for us on state compliance, keeping us on the straight and narrow with OPMA and making sure we're compliant with a variety of different things that they're checking for in areas other than just the financial stuff. Alan, of course, deserves a shout out here as well for coordinating and overseeing. He's deeply involved in those efforts. Debbie Bond, our city treasurer, has a hand in these things. It really is an all hands on deck administrative moment. And if you compare kind of where we've come, we've chiseled away from having a number of issues that really needed to be addressed a few years ago to a point where we have a perfectly clean audit is a remarkable accomplishment. And the last shout out, I think, goes to this council for setting policies and expectations and standards that get us to a point where we can have this kind of outcome. So thank you for everyone involved.
And I'm sure any of the council members that were here 4 years ago, remember that was a very different discussion that we had to have. And I'm just thrilled to see how much work and effort has gone into it. As well as Karen, who works with payroll,
Yes.
and your, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, your AP clerk.
Vicky.
Thank you. Sorry. They helped us a lot and we spend a lot of time with them. So I really appreciate them.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Diana. Okay, I am putting too fine a point on it. The number of cities in the state of Utah that will return an audit with 0 findings is very, very small. And so it represents a remarkable accomplishment here. Next up, we have Nick Porter here to visit with us about a rezone for the Hidden Hollow subdivision. Spencer can't be here tonight. Alan, do you want to talk us through, and including the Planning Commission, I understand, made a negative recommendation on this rezone request.
Yes.
But while it has not been common for the city council to go against a negative recommendation from the Planning Commission, it is the council's prerogative to make a decision on the issue. The state law requires us to have Planning Commission make a recommendation on these kinds of land use items, but it doesn't require the city council to follow that direction. And hence we have this application before us on rezoning this section of RE5 to an RE1, which is where it had been zoned just a few 3 or 4 years ago, I think. Alan, do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, without going into an extreme amount of detail, back in the day, if you remember, this road right here was to go all the way up and tie into this road. And last year, in lieu of consideration of this subdivision and in discussions, it turned out it was a better thought and a more feasible financially for both the developers or the city primarily. There's no way we could afford to help traverse several of these different drainage ways that come down through here. The idea was that this area through here could dead end, and likewise this area up here would dead end, and there wouldn't be the road going through there, which would be, like I said, financially infeasible to install. And so at that time, city council considered an option to rezone these areas to RE5 as opposed to RE1, which was what it was zoned at beforehand. In doing so, and in the discussions, one thing that the city probably didn't bring up during that time was that by so doing, the open space that is non-buildable, the developer was under the impression that that could be used in a bonus density type subdivision method. It's actually not the case, as the developers come to realize after the fact. And so that's one thing that we need to take into consideration here. And so Nick Porter's here, and in looking to develop this property, just this one here, in looking at developing that, one option,
Alan,
and I believe,
are you trying to show us your cursor? It's
Yeah,
not
cursor's
showing.
not showing up here. Is it just this? Just this piece, or does it also include that?
Yes.
sorry. I think it's just this
Okay.
one. Nick, does it include this one as well, or just this one?
Yeah, it's both of them.
It's both of these right here. And so looking at that, and trying to develop those properties, which Nick has been working with the planning commission now for probably 3 or 4 months or longer,
Yeah, 6 or 7.
6 or 7 months now, looking at different options and trying to develop with a myriad of different questions, concerns that have been brought up. And right now, the request is that if it remains RE5 and he's not able to use the bonus density method by using the open space in order to develop the property, it lines up more with an RE1 subdivision. And so his request is to rezone the property to an RE1 zone, essentially rezoning it back to an RE1, which we looked at last year or the year before, and rezoning it to the RE5. Essentially, that's what's taking place. Obviously, there's a number of other items, concerns, questions that can probably be discussed tonight, of which Spencer's much better answering those questions. And if the mayor chooses, Nick could probably answer a little bit more of those questions, or a few more of those questions than I can probably answer tonight.
Do you have, or you or Brad, you can probably help weigh on this a little bit as well. Just a little bit of a summary of why the planning commission made a negative recommendation
Sure.
on the rezone.
Yeah, I'll give my take on it unless Alan wants to go first.
No, you're probably better at this.
So I did talk to him. I forget it wasn't, you know,
4-1.
Was
I
it
think
4-1?
Dwight voted.
that's
in
right,
favor.
4-1. So it wasn't quite unanimous, but and I think it tugged at him a lot both ways. In the end, I think they felt like there were a lot of questions. How would we provide water? How would the access work? This is on, if everybody's familiar, Wildercrest, you can see at the bottom of the screen, and that's the only access to Wildercrest, which I think was a holding point for a lot of people, which is a struggle for me, how that access is going to work. But the other thing was the water, of course, up on the bench. There's no secondary water. The developer has addressed some of those questions, especially water, with some ideas of having some restrictions in place. But as far as, I also have some of my opinion. I'm trying to summarize what the planning commission, their thinking was. There were just too many struggles. The grade of the road is, I think, hitting about 10%.
Yeah, and the proposed
that-
subdivision that Nick's brought before us, it started out with probably the road at the end of that road is about 14-15%. And with the latest designs, it would take some new angle of the road going in there, and it takes it down to 10.
Yeah.
Obviously, that takes some engineering and a feat to get it to 10, but that would line up with our current code.
Yeah, which is pushing the limits of the current code, but would be allowed. And I think with all those things, they didn't feel like they were willing to do it. That was the take that I got.
Okay,
So-
excellent. And thank you. I don't want, I want you to weigh in with your opinion as we discuss this.
And I
And so that was helpful to share that. And recognize that your opinion and the planning commission's opinion may well be different, and that will be helpful to inform our discussion as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brad. Okay, so I guess you have the gist of it before you. Nick, do you want to speak to this just a little bit as well, and share any thoughts with the council And then after you have a moment to share a few thoughts, we'll go ahead and open it up for discussion among the council.
Yeah, thank you, Nick Porter. I think Alan did a really good job of introducing this. These are the pieces we're looking to develop. A few years ago, the city reached out to Jim Maloof and asked him if he would consider downzoning his property from R1 or upzoning from R1 to R5. At the time, it was not explained to him, and I don't think city staff totally realized that in the code, if you're using a density determinant method, you cannot count slopes greater than 30%. So the reason Jim decided to voluntarily rezone his property is because he could still get a handful of homes there. As I put this application together for him, we dug into the code and realized that that was in there. And when we discovered that, we realized we could get one home on this ground. And so that's the purpose of this rezone, because Jim never would have agreed, obviously, to rezone his property had that been articulated to him. So for me, the core of the issue is we have a situation where a landowner, voluntarily did that, but didn't necessarily have all the tools he needed to make that decision. It just wasn't articulated, and it wasn't a malicious thing. It's like an unintended consequence. And so now we're hoping to rezone this, and we've worked really hard with Planning Commission. We do recognize that this isn't flat topography. I think we've made some concessions, and we're very conscientious of the water situation. We've presented a lot of ideas there of how we can restrict that. The city's proactively installing 2 tanks that would relieve this situation as well. So there are plans to get water in this area. I also think that it is important to recognize that Jim Maloof personally bore a big expense to put the current water tank up there. Now, he was developing other land, Canyon Ridge Estates Phase 3, but he also had a subdivision in this area that was approved at one point. He had 14 homes on his land at that point. We're now proposing 7. So he has taken a step down, but this tank exists today in large part from Jim Maloof. And I think it's important to recognize the things he has done for the city. Wildercrest is possible because of Jim and because of the connectivity that he created up there and the water source he's put up there. So in my mind, there's a level of integrity that I think needs to happen between the city and Jim, as far as I would just hate to see a fine print in the code issue. Let's not let it boil down to something like that, in my opinion, and kind of have it be a gotcha moment. That's what I have to say. Are there any specific questions you'd like me to address?
Can you show, do you have like a rough concept or something to show where roads would lie?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out which portions, because it looks like huge portions of that land would be unused based on the little snippet that we got here.
Correct. Do you actually have the concept plan instead of the road grade?
Let me see if I can find that.
So this that one that said Hidden Hollow 3, that might be it.
Alan, while you're pulling that up, Nick, I was on the planning commission when that rezoned to RE5, and your recollection is what I recall as well. So I don't think we did discuss bonus density during that meeting. And I think actually the commission at that time was probably unaware of that as well, just to reiterate what you said. I went and pulled my notes and the recordings from that night. So
Yeah,
for the council's purposes.
Thank you. Okay, so do you want me to run through this
Sure.
and kind of explain what we're doing here? So we are connecting onto a steep road, and we recognize that it was kind of different back then, and there's different standards now. So we've actually got this road down to an 8%, which is code. 10%, city council can flex up to 10%. You guys have the ability to do that. The city engineer recommends a 10% here, but we do have it drawn up as an 8 as well. There's 7 lots, and you're absolutely right, Mayor. There is a lot of topography here. So these are 1 acre pads that are, when you walk up there, you'll notice they're not unruly grades. Now, this section is like, this is the mountainside here. And so you can see this is a 1 acre pad, 1 acre pad, 1 acre pad. And then you've got a pad up here, a pad here, a pad here, and then a pad here. And so these are, you know, even though this lot says 7.79, it's fairly deceiving because it's, in all reality, it's 1 acre, and then you own the mountainside. So we will need to rework the road that exists there now. We need to come back a ways, and we need to, you know, instead of tapping onto a 14% road, we need to start scaling it and smoothing that out.
Will that affect the driveway of that existing home?
It will not. We're conscientious of their driveway there. And so we start after their driveway to rework that.
And I had a question about this that I've asked, and why not an RE2 zone? Because every lot would be 2 acres or larger.
We've actually, this concept plan is, this actually isn't the current one. The city has it, Spencer does. I'm sure you could dig around in there and find it, but these couple lots went sub 2 acres.
Okay.
When we had to rework the road. We had to shift the road to the west to get it into more palpable grades.
Okay, so that's why.
So that's why we're asking.
To keep the road grade down, essentially,
Yeah.
then? Okay. Which maybe.
I'll share a couple of thoughts on this. You know, in my, from my perspective, you know, seven lots on the hillside as opposed to 5 or things like that. I don't see that as being a huge difference. You know, a lot of the concern that I had when we did the rezone from our RE1 to RE5 was how we'd be able to support something where if we had you know, something like 25, 30 acres that they're dealing with here, that we had 25 or 30 homes up there, and that would just be unwieldy and very difficult to work with. There's a couple of things that I think the Planning Commission, given that their mission is a little bit different than the City Council's mission in evaluating, may not have given some consideration to. I'm not saying that their decision was incorrect. In fact, based on the things they were considering, I think they made a good decision. Two things that Bear mentioned that are benefits to the city associated with this development that I think the City Council may want to consider. One is we get a road that's at 14% and is very difficult to plow in the long run. And we have a developer who's willing to work with us and correct it so that we can bring that road back into compliance with better standards for longer term maintenance. And that's very helpful and something I appreciate. A second piece is that by developing this land, we, as you all know, we need a second line, a redundant line reaching from Green Canyon, basically where many of our water sources are, and much of our storage across the bench, because there have been years where we've had great water years, but we've had to do water restrictions in the bench because the pace of growth has come there faster than we've been able to expand our water system. A development here would result in Nick and the individuals he represents paying the costs of developing a significant portion of that water line here, and then the Utco pieces adjoining. I know there's some interest in seeing some things go forward there, that would cover a significant portion of the costs having development take place and pay those costs, rather than having to use city taxpayer dollars or water fees, water user dollars to cover those costs. And those considerations aren't necessarily the purview of the Planning Commission, but they're things that I think we should consider. Those are positives that I wanted to share on this. One point of concern that I have is, and want to relay for your understanding as well, Nick, if we saw a 7-lot concept plan and could just say, do this or don't do that, I would be tempted to just say, yeah, let's do this. But that's not the way the regulatory, those aren't the regulatory tools that the state has given North Logan for overseeing land use. They say, first you set the zone, then you get the application and you determine if the application meets the terms of the zone or not. And hence you're asking for a rezone rather than an approval. The challenge with this system is that if we vote for a rezone on to RE1, then you would not be bound to this particular concept, but you or anyone who took possession of the property subsequently, and I'm not trying to accuse you of intending to do this, but could bring anything that would conform to an RE1 zoning, and the city would be bound to approve it, whether we liked it or not, as long as it conformed to the terms of the RE1 zone. And so while I look at this and say this would conform potentially at first glance to an RE1, and therefore might be approvable under an RE1, it's not the only proposal that could be approvable under an RE1, and there are other proposals that could be approved under an RE1 that I would not be comfortable with. And part of me says, yeah, but what are the chances of that? He's got a concept drawn up. And yet I can, in the last 10 years of municipal service, twice we've had situations where we've approved a rezone on the basis of one concept, only to have a developer come back in and say, actually, we've changed our mind and we want to do this instead. And to be honest, we didn't have any tools to stop that. In a shout out to one of those in particular, the individual recognized that it could be perceived as a bait and switch and chose not to pursue it after that rezone had taken place. And so if there's a little bit of, I don't know if that's going to be a heartburn issue. Those are council decisions, not a mayoral decision. But anticipating from some conversations I've had that might be a heartburn issue, I wanted to lay that out there so that you understand if there's a reluctance to go to an RE1, it may not even be that the reluctance is with this plan, but that we have to make sure we're comfortable with any RE1 zone plan that could come in before we authorize an RE1 zone, because of the fact that we are in effect authorizing any RE1 development by making that rezone request. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Damon. It definitely explains my hope that you could make an R2 zone work.
I was thinking the same thing.
Is exactly that. And I don't want to change the road grade to do it. Is there a method of limiting the lots? I know we've talked about some possibilities that way. If we could come up with a method to say 7 lots substantially similar to this, I don't know how we do that. And if, that's.
I have a few ideas if the council's interested in exploring that option, and Nick, if you're interested in exploring that option.
I wanted to throw a couple other things out along with what Damon has said. This one does bother me more than other ones, just because from what I understand about the tank up there, and I lived up there, I don't live up there now, but just down from this development when that tank was put in. And the way I understood it at the time was that Jim Maloof, I can't think of the name of the 2 other people up there, but they contributed. Bruce
Nelson and Alan Steed.
Yeah, they contributed some somewhere in the $250,000 range from what I understood at the time. I could be wrong on some of these numbers.
That's accurate. And I think it's about a quarter of the cost or
Yeah.
a third of the cost.
And they did that with they had a concept plan actually for development up here that included a lot more lots than what we're looking at. And they did it, from what I understood at the time, to be able to go ahead with that concept of a lot more lots up there. And so they had kind of put some money into the infrastructure of water up there. They didn't move on their concept plan and it expired. Is that accurate? I know they at least had one.
They got it to a point, but then it expired after a certain point. So the
Okay.
subdivision expires after
Yeah.
a certain
And part
duration.
of the cost of the tank, they contributed not just for these, I think for the third phase of Canyon Ridge to update the water there and fix some problems up on Naomi Drive. I could have some of these facts a little off, but I know they put money into it. And so there is a little bit of obligation that I think they have a right to develop this property with the money they put into it. The other thing is, I don't think anybody understood that you couldn't use that hillside. And that does bother me because we would be here looking at an R1 zone, although we'd be asking for the road to connect over across the hillside, which they could do on this parcel. I don't think it's great for the city either. So I would like to see something go in that's, maybe only 7 lots instead of whatever could possibly come. So I think that's some motivation to work with it and make it happen. That's a
Well
couple
said.
thoughts I
Great
had.
points. Other thoughts you guys want to share?
Yeah, I'd say I align with Brad on this. I remember that meeting fairly well, having reviewed it. And I think the intention there was actually good without understanding the full ramifications, even from the planning commission that night, which I already stated. I do, to Brad's point, the trade-offs here are significant. I mean, what it could have been would have been a real challenge for the city. And I think that was the intent of increasing that zone at the time. So I'm interested to see the RE2 option, because I think if we could somehow make that work, that does tie it to 7 lots, which is manageable there, in my opinion, especially with the road, the reduction of the incline on the road. I don't know, Mayor, you might have some thoughts about that too.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think that needs to be addressed potentially is the actual code around the bonus density determinant, and the fact that that's not you can't calculate that now in the actual amount of zones available, since it's non-buildable space. So there are a couple different things that I've been thinking through since we spoke 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so I'll share a couple of thoughts that I have for things that might work if looking at an RE2 zone might be possible. But I got to be honest, I'd rather have an 8% grade road where things crept just under 2 acres than even a 10% road and keep it to 2 acres. Another thought would be to make some adjustments that are unique to the RE5 zone. And Alan and I workshopped this a little bit and kicked around a few ideas on this earlier. I don't want to say that I came up with some great solution when Alan was really a key thinker on this problem solving. But some of the problems are the frontage requirements in RE5 are like 300 feet or something like that, which is really big. And if you were working in an area where you were literally had 5-acre squares right next to each other, then that could make sense. But this area right up here on the hillside is the only RE5 in our city. We don't have areas in our city left that are such that we would have 5-acre squares next to each other. And so I don't think we really contemplated when we set those rules that those would probably that just isn't going to fit here. And I think collapsing dialing down a little bit on those, if we went down to something closer to 150 or 120, which would be more consistent with elsewhere, would help to make a project that looked like this much more feasible. The second thing is I think it's a good policy that the city has that unbuildable areas, slopes over 30%, can't count towards bonus density in most zones. a tweak to the code that allowed some amount of that to happen with a cap on the number of additional lots that you could get above density determined or something, or a cap on the amount that we could sit down and calculate and work out. If we just made those two adjustments to the RE5 zone, then I think this concept plan would work under an RE5. And to be honest, I would actually, if you're amenable, the bonus density requires either that it be dedicated to the city or that it remain open space. And we might want to have a little bit of a conversation about whether there's which of those two routes we might want to explore. But I think pulling together a couple of things like that gives us a development that's workable, where I would like these people to be, these landowners, to have a way to make some good use and valuable use of their land, while also, giving the city a little more protection than we would have if we just rezoned to an RE1. And doing that, I think, would recognize some of the concerns that the Planning Commission articulated as well, because I think that's an important thing for us to consider too. So do you have any reactions to those thoughts?
Yeah, I was looking over my notes as you were talking, and others were, and this lot 1 goes down to 1.98 acres, and that's my only one that's sub 2. I am almost confident if we rezone this to R2, looking at that,
we could figure that out.
We can, you're an engineer, Brad. I'm pretty sure we could make that a flat 2 and keep this road grade at 8%. So now that you say that, I actually do think an R2, using the standard subdivision method, obviously not density determinant, otherwise we run back into the same issue, but an R2 rezone standard, it's going to be really hard if you look at this to squeeze in more lots than that. And the R2 zone, it doesn't have the 300-foot frontage requirement that the RE5 zone does have. So that we'd be good. We'd be good there. I think a clean way to do this probably would be to rezone this to an R2.
So that puts it at 250 foot still, I think, in an R2. Is that, maybe I'm remembering wrong? For your frontage. I don't know if that works or not.
Some
Maybe
of
I'm
those will
wrong.
work, but the lots 3 and 4, I don't think you're quite going to get to 250. Just eyeballing it.
Do you want to look at that code, Brad? And I can
I'm
mention
just
a
trying
couple
to
of
find the
things.
right thing right now. Yeah.
One other thought I had is there's, in other cities that I've developed in, specifically Logan, we came into this issue with kind of a bait and switch with developers and teeth that you could put in something. There's kind of two other ways that haven't been discussed tonight. One is a deed restriction that just simply restricts the number of lots across the deed. That has teeth. Also a development agreement. So you could approve this. You could approve this contingent upon the development agreement spelling out if this is sold, it reverts back to RE5, or if there's more lots than 7, it goes back to an RE5. That's another way, another legal document that you can have that prevents a bait and switch.
I appreciate that. Those are methods I'm not as familiar with and don't have the same level of understanding and comfort. Personally, it's not my decision, though. That's a council call.
So how does the frontage work on the end of a cul-de-sac? Because it says a width. It says width 250. Are the cul-de-sacs allowed to go less, or?
See, there's a different rule for.
I think it's
cul-de-sac.
different. I think it is. I think it calculates at some distance, like 30 feet out.
It's usually the
can't
middle of the lot, isn't it?
You have tax specified, you can say it's specified at 100 feet back, and you can get the frontage on the arc of the curve. So you can show like the path where you want them to be on there, and then you can specify arc length.
So lot 3 and 4, I'm not sure how it's calculated either. I can't remember it. I think they may work. So that may be an option. Truthfully, my goal would be to keep it at 7 lots. if we can have a bigger number on there for the zoning, I suppose that looks better. But in all reality, my goal would be to keep the road not, down at that 8% and to keep it down to 7 lots. So whatever method we can do. And the other thing this has been around planning commission for a long time. And so I feel bad dragging it through too many more meetings, although you're probably not doing it this winter, but.
Yeah, I'm not from a development standpoint, we just had elections, not everybody's coming back. So my worry is if we kick it to a code change, I'm going to see a fresh new planning commission. I'm going to see new city council members. I may not be dealing with people that understand the history of this. I think if we can make an R2 work due to the fact that this does have a long history of trying to go through the city and an even longer history of trying to be developed, I think an R2 makes sense.
I don't even know if we would be able to
couldn't-
zone to an
have to
R2
go back.
today either. I think
Does it
either
have to
way
be
we did it,
resubmitted?
it'd have to go back to planning commission.
We noticed the meeting as an RE5 to RE1. And if we were to make a change to an RE2, then we would have made a decision that was not noticed on the agenda as under consideration. And under Open and Public Meetings Act, all it would take is one person somewhere saying that they thought that wasn't fair, and we'd be back at square one. And so, not to mention the fact that even if no one thought it was unfair, it's not what the rules say we have to do, and we need to follow the rules. That said, the Planning Commission has their next meeting on December 2nd.
Yeah.
And if you were really geared towards finishing, two things that I think could be to your comfort. First of all, your new mayor is the current chair of the Planning Commission, and so she's well aware of the history and the background on this. And 3 of the 4 gentlemen up here will still be a majority of this council will remain the same. And Joni Karchner, who will be on the council at that time, is back here in the back as well. So she's listening and involved, and will have some awareness of what's happening. That said, if you were really anxious, if you came, that's obviously there's some work to be done to explore a couple of avenues. I'm open to exploring the RE2. I'm open to just doing some code revisions on what the RE5 zone requirements look like. We can meet, have you connect with staff. You can even reach out to members of the Planning Commission or of this body, or members elect of this body if you chose. And if you put not only either a code change or a different rezone request on the agenda for December 2nd for the Planning Commission, the City Council will have another meeting not
In
long
December,
after that
yeah.
in December. And you could have concept and either code change or a rezone request on the agenda at that time, and could get that far. Also, though, even if we approve this tonight, you'd still have to be back for concept in December. And then you would be working with the new council and mayor in January on approval of the development plan and such. So you'll be working across 2 sets of folks, no matter what. how
Yeah, and
things
that
unfold.
I think working with 2 sets of folks is fine, given the fact that I can bring this through to this body again in December, having been to Planning Commission due to Spencer getting COVID and putting one more meeting on there. So that works out good. Obviously, my first preference would be to rezone it back to what it was, to an R1. But if the body is uncomfortable with that, I'm okay coming back in with an RE2 and making sure that works.
Yeah, I think coming back in with, I would encourage you to explore both sets of options. The council is really the ones that need to give you direction on here, but I think your chances of completion on a quicker time frame are always a little quicker if we have multiple options, whether it be RA2. Again, for me, I don't have a vote on the matter. I don't look at this sketch of the beginnings of a concept and have an immediate issue with it. Obviously, we're not being asked to decide on that question tonight. The question is, what regulatory framework does the city feel comfortable with passing that would allow us to get to something that looks akin to this? And that, that's what we have to figure out. And the more options you can bring and work with us on that help us to achieve that, the more likely we are to succeed.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, so Nick, we've spoken. I actually love the options that have been presented tonight. I think it's a good blend of protecting the city right there with what could happen if the development changed hands, but still leaving the door open for what you're trying to do there. So from my perspective, let's see what we can do in the next couple of weeks. And these are some great options that I think could benefit both parties personally.
Perfect. Appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, I agree. The same. One other point that hasn't been addressed that I really like that you've added into the concerns and resolutions is restricting the outside turf to the 10,000 square feet to help with those water issues and things like that up there. So just wanted to point out that's a good feature you've added in there as well.
Yeah,
I
thank
like.
you.
But I am uncomfortable rezoning tonight back to that RE1. The RE2 would be something I think we all be more comfortable with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I want to commend the range of things you've done there to help us to be able to resolve concerns about water and some of those kinds of things. That's very, very helpful and very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your time.
So I'm hearing no motion on the rezone and taking no action. There is, do we have to take a formal action on it, or can it die for?
I was actually just going to ask that question, which one you have to do.
Well, I guess the question, I'm going to put that question on Nick. You do have the right to ask the council for an up or down vote on this issue if you would like to. Or you could just leave it there such that if other options and negotiations break down, that you could come back and still act on this request, which is probably what I would recommend is your most advantageous path. But if you would like an up or down vote on the matter tonight, you're entitled to it. What's your preference?
I think I'll pass on the up or down vote.
Okay.
So I'll just let it be.
Okay,
Appreciate your
excellent.
time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nick, I know you've put a lot of time in to working with the city and it's appreciated. It probably feels like a lot of hoops. I don't think anybody's intended to drag it out for you, but it's a little bit of a hard subdivision. So
No,
appreciate the work.
yeah, I
on
get it. And we want to make something work with the city too. So I think we're getting to the end of it. So it sounds good. Appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thanks.
One quick comment, Nick, if you could get with me fairly quickly, because depending on the route that you go, we have to notice the meeting in a particular
It would
manner.
have to be noticed. Yeah, I would recommend just notice it as a public hearing, period.
Okay.
And then that gives you the time that you need to explore, and we can cancel it if needed.
So notice it as a change to an R
To an
on
RE2.
R2. Okay.
Yeah.
You'll be my first phone call in the morning, Alan.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah,
fine.
or the code change we'd need to do.
does the code change have to be a code change to RE5 wouldn't have to go through a public hearing, would it?
It would, because it's a change to the Title 12, which is the subdivision
Gotcha.
ordinance.
But I
Can you notice both?
notice them both,
Yeah.
because I think the
Yeah,
planning
notice
commission
them
is
both.
going to be thinking about both of those options, and we want anyone who wants to be able to weigh on it to be able to do so.
Perfect. Yeah, if we can keep in touch, just so that we can get everything properly noticed in time.
I'll talk to you in the morning. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Now, I just want to clarify so that we don't get into this density issue again later on. That is the only two properties that we had in the RE5 zone. Are there any others that we're going to get into the same situation in the future?
The Utco properties to the north of this are also not directly to the north, kind of to the north of the high slope part of lot 4. Those are also RE5, if I understand correctly.
Is there any other in the city?
I
No.
think it's just Utco and Maloof.
Do we have any RE2 in the city?
Not that I'm aware of. We used to, and I don't know if we have it.
I don't
used to
think we
have
do.
Ag and RE2, and I don't think we have either now.
We may want to direct the planning commission to look at a language change in that RE5 zone so we can maybe alleviate this in the
Yeah, that might be an easier path.
future.
Up here as well, though, just keep in mind that the current intent of these property owners, they've looked at this several times. They're more interested in one or two estate lots, so it doesn't become a major issue for
Okay.
that zone. But yes, we can look at that because there's errors in that RE5 zone.
The properties associated with Utco and the Steed family properties, I think, are both in the RA5.
Actually, the Steed is RE1.
Steed is RE1,
Yeah.
okay.
And
And then the
Utco's
Hyde
RE5.
properties to the north further are RE1 as well.
Those are all county, so.
Oh, that's-
Sorry, once you get further north of Northwood.
gotcha, thanks.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
All right, next up is revisiting the concept plan for the Smiling H subdivision. There were a couple of issues that we raised last time that are concerns for this, particularly pertaining, we had the affectionately dubbed Wildercrest rule about the number of lots that can be constructed with one access. We had some discussion about whether to punch through to 800 East. And so they conducted a traffic study and brought that to us. And there's some discussions about feasibility here. And then the other concept that we discussed involved, shifting a layout. They lose a couple of lots. And create an additional cul-de-sac that would give a different layout. So I think the developer's preferred option is to punch through to 8th East, but it would be a right turn only. And then we'd have to think about whether to put some sort of curb in the middle of the road that prohibited, that physically stopped people from turning left. Going out of there. One of the challenges with that is it would in all likelihood prohibit people from turning left into the subdivision, as well as we try to reckon with the awkward alignment of where they have property available and 2850 North as it branches off into the subdivision back there behind North Park there. So that was one item that was raised. Another, we also talked a little bit about how to handle the safe route to school issue on 600 East, had some discussions about water. Alan, do you want to give any additional updates on these items and where things are at? Or Matthew's here representing the development team as well.
I can go over just a few items very quickly that were discussed. Sorry, let me scroll over to this subdivision. So the one question regarding the safe route to school, I'll address that first. This subdivision actually, it could potentially help in one regard, in that the east part of this road would be developed from all the way from 2500 North down to the north edge of this property here. You can't see my cursor. To this property here, all the way to here. So you would have sidewalk at that point, which would be fantastic because this road traditionally has been used as the safe route to school by closing the gates at certain times of day when the school children have access or they're going to and from school. And then the issue becomes south of that point, which isn't part of this subdivision, which is a city issue at that point. And how do we handle that? How do we account for that and work with that? This section of road is kind of, it falls under what used to happen a lot throughout our city. And it still happened a few years ago when people would come in to subdivide or look at a lot, they'd come in, they'd subdivide, and then the city would give them the standard at the time. And that was, you have to install curb, gutter, sidewalk, or the frontage of your property that was being developed. And sometimes they would defer those and say, you can pay those at that time that the city comes through and develops the road. And then you'd have to participate at that time. Ironically, each one of these homes have different standards. Some have curb, gutter, and sidewalk as the standard. Some of them have curb gutter sidewalk and road improvement, and some of them have no standard. So it's basically just, there was nothing required of the property at that time. We have to go through and probably discuss with each of those property owners what the requirements are, and we have those on deed as well. So we'd have to discuss what those requirements would be for each of those property owners. And then the city's going to have to come to the table as well to improve kind of the east half of that road or improve it at some point. I don't know if I'd call this a road entirely. I would use my friendly term of potholes holding hands. That's what this is. It's just a double chip seal on no base. And so over time, we've just had to fix that. And so there's really not a lot of shoulder. So it's a major concern regarding the sidewalk and the safe aspect to get it through. And that would become a city concern at that time that we would have to address as this subdivision goes in. The other questions that were raised were related to water. Water is a major concern for the city right now, a valid concern. We've just spoken about that with a previous subdivision that came up here. And over the past 6 months, it's actually had some positive results of discussing what would those requirements would be for subdivisions that come in. They'd be based off a water model. So when someone comes in, they submit a water model and it shows how much they could water currently within the system, within the city. Currently in the city, we really don't have any issues with any subdivision. We could add hundreds of more homes for 9 months of the year. 3 months of the year, that's not the case. That's our high demand. That's our peak usage time, June, July, and August. And so that's what we're looking at is those peak demands during those summer months. And so looking at the subdivision, there would be determinations based off that water model that would come out that would say how many homes could go in. And then we'd hit another threshold before more homes could go in. So these certain features would have to go in. So the additional reservoirs, the additional wells that we're working on right now. So I don't know if that sufficiently answers water. But the other item is road access, and hats off to the developer. After our last meeting, they went and did a traffic study and they went through several different options. One of the things, so let's see if I can pull this up. One of the additional concerns, I'll address this one first. And our planner brought this up to me down here on the south, this road, and I can't even see what that number is, sorry. But this road right here, as it exits onto 8th East, comes out, and it's somewhat of an offset, I'd call it a quasi intersection, where it goes across the street to the Stevens property. There's an access road that goes in there to 2 current homes that are in that subdivision. I can't remember how many more homes they could add over time, probably another couple homes, I would imagine. But that intersection we could talk about, and we have had those preliminary discussions. And that's something I think working with the developer that we've talked about that could be adjusted slightly so it's not a major concern in the future. And so that they have safe access, both those going to this subdivision and to the Stevens property, and we don't have an issue at that time.
So does it not line up with the proposed Stevens?
It doesn't, it
road?
lines up, but not perfectly. And so you look at this, it comes out right here, and this is that driveway access that comes back to the home, which you can't see my cursor.
Yeah.
It's right here. And so it's more of an issue of kind of shifting that to the north or just making sure that lines up and doesn't cause an issue in the future. This is the type of concern that we're going to discuss to the north, but this is a concern where you have 2 offsetting intersections, quasi driveway to the east with multiple accesses coming onto that, and then the major subdivision access on the west side. And so looking at that is one concern, and that might be a little bit more easily addressed than this one to the north. And this one right here, and looking at this, and let's go back to the concept plan. The developer has done a traffic study with a traffic engineer that's done a considerable amount of work in looking at this. And the request last time was from one of the council members that recommended, instead of a cul-de-sac at the end of this, because we like to eliminate cul-de-sacs, perhaps having a right in, right out option on this road. And looking at that, Damon kind of covered this, the mayor, in different options for access through here. Having a right in, right out answers some of the questions of that offsetting intersection. And this is about kind of the worst case scenario for an offsetting intersection right there. It's right there. And what this looks like it's proposing is a right out and then a left in and a right in coming from the north. Now there's different options that they could do on this intersection, but in talking with the city engineer, he congratulated the developers for going through doing this lengthy study and coming up with different options for this. He did have concerns though about a left in into this option, into this subdivision. If you're going north in the future, there'll be a roundabout at that intersection. And so coming north at that time at that intersection, sorry, roundabout at 2500 north and 8th east, just south of here, there'll be a roundabout, which would have continuous traffic coming north. And so at that point, he's worried that there would be a backup if there isn't either a median or the divider there. Obviously, the city wants to avoid dividers. And so a more logical solution would be an only right in or right out option, a true right in, right out, or going back to the other option of a cul-de-sac at that end, which the mayor described the issues with that in reducing the number of lots throughout the subdivision. And so regardless, I jumped through 3 different items of major concern that were brought up last time. There are a few other concerns that have been raised. There are more items that we probably need to address at developmental plan, but more, these are, even water is more developmental plan, but these are all concept related items.
And just to clarify on that point, and would encourage if there's a motion on this item this evening, that the motion would include that. A concept plan approval per our code has bearing on the number of lots, the approximate configuration of the lots, the layout of the roads and the configuration of the roads and how the subdivision flows. We would not be making any approval or warranting the capacity to serve with water. That is not determined until the next stage. And so in the motion, could well end up noting, because the reality is upon approval at concept stage, the number of lots that are ultimately approved and allowed to construct could be 0 if the water model shows we don't have enough water to do it. The amount could be 200, or well, it couldn't be 200 because there's not 200 lots, but it could be the full number of lots. Or it could end up being something in between the amount that we have the current capacity to serve, depending on where the water modeling comes back. And we can make that explicit in the motion to be clear that we are not approving that. We're not approving soils, drainage, grading, any vegetation, any of those other kinds of things, because we don't have the things we need to do. The goal of concept is to say, we've reached conformity with some core elements of city code. We're ready to move on to the next. It's worth it to invest the cost in conducting the next set of studies because the initial concept seems to fit with city code. I'll express for my part an appreciation for the developer going back and looking at some alternative strategies to deal with the conformity to the number of lots off one access. I remain uncomfortable personally. I don't know why I do this because I don't actually have a vote on the matter, but I remain a little uncomfortable with the access. Well, eliminating that cul-de-sac is in some ways a laudable goal. I have some concerns about the access being a right term only, right in, right out. Adding, we don't have the width or the striping at this point in time to make a center turn lane that would support a left turn in, and adding curbing to the center of roads, while it can have a function in some instances, is not typical of the nature of this particular road. At least it's not been our practice anywhere else in the city. And we've still got kind of that awkward alignment there. My personal preference, I would be, and I honestly, my read in terms of safety, flow, efficacy, the intersection, alignment, those kinds of things, fits with, Lance's recommendation that it would be a better choice. Lance, our city engineer, that it would be a better choice to absorb an extra cul-de-sac on this one than it would be to have that disruption on 8th East at that location, with the understanding that in time, as the other parcels to the north punch through, that there will be an access to 800 East. It's just that it would be up by North Park Elementary, where the access would line up squarely with an existing roadway. And we might have to wait a little bit to get that 8th East access, but I think it will be a better access and a higher quality access for us than it would be to locate it here to achieve a short-term goal of access onto 8th East, but one that doesn't line up as well with the road network. But as I always remind you after I go on a rant like that, it's a council decision, not a mayoral decision.
I did wonder about the how you would do a right turn only, obviously with the curbing in the road and stuff. Is that add a lot of complexity to the plowing, or is it not a big deal? In the plowing, okay. The maintenance is, you feel pretty comfortable with.
People will hit the median if it's there. It's going to happen.
Sure. I don't love the solution right there either. I don't know if I have quite as strong of an opinion right now, but
Just
I
go to
don't like
Culver's and
cul-de-sac.
watch that. With the right turnout only on the credit union. You just go up and you do a U-turn, then there's more accidents. So yeah, it doesn't work.
What was the total lot from the original concept plan? If the cul-de-sac stayed, what was the reduction in total lots? Was that ever calculated 2 weeks ago, Alan?
The developers would have a better understanding of that.
Under current code with the single entrance, 2 to 3.
Do you have a rendering of what things would look like if we went the cul-de-sac route instead of the outlet on? Yes, please do. Yes. Thanks.
Matthew Bishop. Thank you, Mayor and council members. We don't have one to present at this time. We've done some rough sketches of it where we take and just go up through there and then cul-de-sac kind of up in that area. And then you would have a cul-de-sac there. So you wouldn't come out onto 8, but that's where we lose a couple lots. And I think it was probably 3 in total, but for sure 2. When we did the planning commission requested the traffic study. And so when we did that, I had Lance, the city engineer, get on the phone with the engineers that were doing the traffic study, because I wanted to make sure any of his concerns were addressed as they were putting together the report. Because to me, working with the city is critical to have a successful development. He expressed his concern about a left-hand turn off of 800 driving north into the development. That was his biggest concern. And as the report came back out, basically they said there is no issue from now or in 5 years from now with a left-hand turn into the development. So while I understand that there's certain things from the report that was actually done, my conversation with Lance was, if it's reducing lots, go with whatever plan makes most sense, because we already are under the density budget. I think it's 3.8 or 3.08 lots per acre, and we're at 2.68, 2.7 lots per acre right now. So we're well under the density budget, the density for a development of this size. The other thing is the curve. Alan, would you zoom back into this section? The curve itself is here within the development, not out in the middle of the street. And forcing the right-hand lane, and as Councilman Anderson said, people can obviously make a U-turn there, and that we've discussed ad nauseum in prep meetings for today and putting this concept plan together. How you control citizens' behavior is, we can do the best we can. Right-hand turn only, have the curb up there. But I don't know what more we can do as a developer to support that or to prevent that. The only other option, if I wish Lance was here, I don't see him, is you could almost mirror that. And so then you have a right in only, and it would prevent people from turning left in because they'd be going over a curb. So it'd be more like a hammerhead type of curve that go, and we would be amenable to that rather than putting in a cul-de-sacs. Is there any questions?
I was curious about and not that I want to jump back to the last proposal, but with the cul-de-sac one option there, it looks like it's diving into those adjacent properties a little bit. And I don't even know. But there would still be an access if we did if you did the cul-de-sac option, the proposed one before, there was that strip of land remains there. What was that going to be?
Community garden,
Okay.
nothing of
Is there
a trail
not-
or path for people to walk out to 8.
Is there not enough width in that piece to do a lot to do another lot?
No, sir.
Okay.
I think it's
Unless you want to change your code.
I think it's only 60 feet wide or
Okay.
something. And I guess we talked a little bit about whether that could be a access. I don't know if that's a good idea though, because people might use it. I know we went over that too, but yeah.
One benefit I will say on the new concept is I do like the fact that we've reduced an exit on a 2500 north, because I think there were 3 right there within a real short distance of each other, 1 on the south, 2 on the north.
Correct. There was another
Yeah.
egress
Yeah.
right here. And actually the traffic study engineers said that overall this plan is significantly better for the traffic flow in the area than it would be if having that second access on 25. Because remember, 600, as it connects, you're going to pick up flow from other areas, not just the development. So having people come out from the development and from 600, you're going to end up with, I think, worse congestion there. And that was what the engineers, the traffic guys said. It'd be better to go with the.
It's interesting because I like that change. And ironically, if we still did the cul-de-sac, then we really handcuffed the development, because then you're losing something like 32 lots if you stayed that way. So I will just say for myself personally, the 8th East is intriguing, but I can't see it working if people can turn left into that going north. So what you just suggested, the hammerhead option where you can only go right and right, is a little more intriguing to me. And I love the fact that, again, that we've lost that second, ingress egress on 2500 north. Man, I don't know. This one's curious what others think, but those are my comments on you. So you guys are at least amenable to right in, right out, right in only
Changing
on
it
it.
to a double hammerhead
Mhm.
or a full hammerhead. So
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Truthfully, I don't know. I don't know which one's better. I'm not qualified to
I don't
even
know
say.
either.
So I don't know if I don't even know how to proceed. I mean, either one of them meet the code. Well, I guess the other one's over a couple of lots, but
If I had, and not to drag these things out, I have a hard time saying which one I really think is better, because I haven't seen what the other one looks like that does that. And another thing I'd throw, is there an option where there is a temporary access there until such time as there's another access farther north, and at that point in time cul-de-sac it, and you get the benefits. Close it off and
make it only right.
and realize, or
Is that a one-way street potentially?
Happens all the time.
So one of
Yeah.
the things we've done in other developments, excuse me, is you have crash gate type of thing for emergency vehicle access. And then this would just become this from here to here, could have utilities going underneath it, but it would be an unimproved road that of fire engine. Love to hear your comments on that. But basically, the fire engine would be able to drive through it for emergency purposes, but we'd shut it off from an ingress egress perspective.
We have experience with one of those.
Not a good experience. I
Not-
think.
No
no,
comment.
we've had some issues.
So let's scratch that. item.
It might work
In this
better
case,
here,
it's a
but,
good idea.
Well, I think when the other roads came in, it may be a viable option when you had a south connection, maybe. But yeah, it's not as restricted as the other ones.
Lance's concern, especially about the left turn in off of 800 East, gives me a lot of pause. And not that I don't have plenty of respect for these gentlemen, but that's kind of where I'm at. And same.
I'm Ben Johnston. I'm the designer for the subdivision, but not the traffic engineer. So you guys didn't get a time to, the traffic engineer, we just got yesterday. And so you probably haven't had a chance to review it, but it's from Hales Engineering in Salt Lake, and they're traffic engineers that I've had work on many projects before. And when they grade roads, they grade it by level of service, A through F. And they graded what it would be at 2021 for the access coming out of 8th East. And it was at a level of service A, and they also did a future count in 2026. And it was still at a level of service A. And I'm just going to read a couple of comments off of what they put in for their. They said, if installed, 2650 North will be located approximately 650 feet north of 2500 North Street. It will access the project on the west side of 8th East. It is anticipated this access will be stop controlled, which it will be. And then it says the access is 2650 North. See, it is likely that only one of these access points will move forward with the final site plan. And they're talking about if this access right here was punched out, or if this one's punched out right now. And then it said, each scenario was evaluated in this analysis. It is assumed that if the access is granted on 2650 North, 8th East, that only right turns would be allowed to exit the project. Left turns would also be allowed, and the existing 2650 North on the east side of 800 would remain full access. So through their study, and they do traffic counts, and they analyze every situation for this, they saw it as not a limiting factor as turning left. And I know we had with the meeting with when Lance discussed that was his issue, is not being able to turn left here onto 8th, and that's up to you guys, but the traffic engineer said it wouldn't be a limiting factor and it wouldn't change the level of service. So I just thought I'd bring that up since you guys haven't had a chance to read that report.
That's helpful. My recommendation to the council would be to take a pause on this so that we can look in detail. Hey, I know it's frustrating because I know time is money in this business, but here's why. We only got the traffic study today to take a look at. Honestly, I haven't had a chance to even read through and really digest. I know it happened, but I want to have a really good understanding. And I know in some communities, 150 lot subdivision is a routine. For us, this is probably the biggest subdivision we've ever had in our city ever in the history of nearly 100 years in North Logan. So I know that's frustrating to hear that. But it's really important for us to feel like we're getting it right. And now that said, if the council feels like you're ready to go, then go. But the other thing is, I would like to see the other design that keeps the cul-de-sac that we discussed last time, even if it results in a reduction of a couple of lots, and so that we can really look through that, weigh it, and then also consider as a third option whether there's a temporary access granted here with some sort of deed restriction or something, a development agreement that requires that to be closed at such time as as access is made available further north. If we could sketch it out in the ideal way, it seems to me at the moment that that's exactly what we would do. If these guys already had access to the north, we wouldn't be stressing about making a connection to 800 East there, but we don't, and we have to figure out how to make it work in the meantime until that other development takes place. But that's my thinking. But if you guys are ready to go, don't let me hold you up.
But before we take off on it, could I throw out just
Or
one
other
or
ideas
two
are
more things?
wholly welcome.
One is on the other access to 800 East. I don't understand how that aligns across the street. Exactly. It looks like it'll line up pretty good, but just to make sure we look at that a little bit so that there's a plan in the future how that's going to work. And I think it's just a little bit off, it looks like. But-
The one that's direct across from, I don't know, can I call it Stevens Lane? Is that fair? Or
Yeah, so I would just throw that out there, and maybe it's all there. I'm just kind of, do we have a plat for the other side? And maybe it's something staff can help with just to see how those two line up. And then, and I need to apologize to Jordan because I never got back to him much on the water, even though it was a holdup point. He did send me some information, and it looks like in the summertime, this would be, like a 1 to 2% increase in the water usage for North Logan, and or not in the summer, sorry, in the winter. And then in the hot months of the summer, it would be, a quarter of that increase, assuming normal usage. And I don't know, I guess that's a concern for me. And I'd like to see the final motion address that a little bit, just to make sure that it's clear, even though I know it's in the next part of it. But those were just a couple things, because when it goes through, maybe I won't be here. And so.
good one, good catch.
So on this alignment, the Alvarez are participating in the project, and they said we could purchase the southern portion of their property so we could make that line up a little bit better. So at the end of the day, as Alan had mentioned, we'll be able to work through this, and it wasn't as much of a concern for him.
Great.
And that was the reason why.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, well, I'm not going to nudge you to make any particular decision, but I'm going to nudge you to make a decision. Are you feeling comfortable, like you're ready to make a motion and take action and move forward? If we do need more time, I would encourage the council to be specific in your guidance for what additional information you need, such that we can be more likely to be ready to move forward in the next instance.
It would be nice to see that other plan, that other option drawn out. It's kind of a guess without it.
Yeah, I think we're close. I don't think there's any harm in giving this another couple of weeks to review the traffic study. I'd like to see the other option too. But there are some benefits to this newly presented concept plan that I see as well. I don't know. I still have concerns on 800 East there, specifically around the left-hand turn going north, and maybe I will review that in the traffic study because I hadn't seen that yet. So that's a fair point, but.
It is for me one of those moments where when we were addressing the issues we had with Wildercrest and said, oh, good grief, why would we ever allow this many homes off of one access or off of that? And then you look at a subdivision plan here and say, gosh, this would in some ways be a better subdivision if we didn't require that thing. And that's part of the challenge of setting ordinances that govern for all situations when it's a challenge to do that.
The offset there with the one on the east and the one on the west troubles me. What road is that one going to the east?
Sorry, are you talking about these ones right here? This offset with this one?
No,
and
up
then-
on 8th East, where we're
Yeah.
talking the right in, right out.
Oh,
And then on the east side of 8th East, there's another outlet and they're just
They're both round.
offset. And there's not a way to line them up.
I just, that's one of those things that I look at. One of our issues when we were looking at Greenville Estates 3 years ago, I don't want to set a problem, in some ways literally in stone mixed together with concrete, that there is literally no way to fix or correct in the future.
And maybe the traffic study is iron that out. I don't know, but it sure appears to be a conflict with those two not lining up.
Yeah, did the traffic study take that into consideration? Do you remember? So it did take into consideration the offset of that
The
east
offset of
road.
those two.
And going left.
That was the exact point. That was part of the conditions of it to look at it because of the
and they still gave that a grade A.
The other thing with that I would look at, because this intersection is at a grade D right now. I don't know if they knew that, the 8th East and 2500 North intersection is at a D right now. So there's a C. Our previous traffic study was at a D, and that was a year ago, and it's worse now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a C. The current traffic study is a D at North Logan City. So moving forward with that, that will turn into a roundabout. And which would make that problem even worse going north. Okay.
Hey, yeah, I have some questions that on what the assumptions are and what the inputs are into the traffic study that I'd like to workshop with Lance. And need an opportunity to be able to do that. Because I appreciate that by doing a traffic study, you're doing more than our concept plan normally requests. But getting to figure out whether this access here is the right solution is really key for us. I'm not hearing a motion. And unless one comes momentarily, I'm inclined to move forward with no act in the agenda without action from the council at this point in time, which I think is better than making a negative recommendation on the specific option. I don't want to foreclose it, but I think we just need a little bit more information. We're really close. Just a little bit more to be able to get there, guys. So thank you for the time and effort that goes into it.
Thanks, guys.
We'll be back in touch through staff. Specific things that I think would be helpful that I'm hearing from the council. If we can see even a draft of what Plan B looks like, and then we need to do our homework so that we're not holding up these guys on account of not having done our homework, such that we've gotten with Lance populated concerns and been able to weigh those two options and be ready to move forward. And yes, please.
What I'd like to do also is go back to the engineers with the revised concept plans. From them, what is causing more negative impacts of the concept.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Gotcha.
Great.
That's
That'd be
helpful.
great.
Sure.
We're meeting in December, so not too many weeks away.
We'll be back
for our
with you
next
in a few
meeting.
weeks. That's
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Our next item is looking at a land use change for approval of improper subdivision. Just by way of, I'll take a shot at this one since Spencer's not here tonight.
Yeah.
Any person who wants to create a parcel can go into the county assessor's office and say, or the county recorder's office and say, hey, I want this to be a parcel of land and I'm going to sell it to someone else. And it gets legally recorded. So if I wanted to, even though my house is only I think we've got about 0.42 acres, I could go down to the recorder's office, parcel off the back 0.2 acres and gift it to my daughter and say, Cambria, this is yours. The problem, well, there's some property rights reasons why the government allows this to take place in the state of Utah. It also generates some problems because at times people go in and say, oh, I'm just going to parcel this off. They record it and then they'll sell that parcel to someone else without, well, that creates a new parcel. It doesn't create a legal buildable right because legal buildable rights only come through the formal legal subdivision process of that the city lays out. So we have a number of places in the city where there are places that are parcels, but they were never properly subdivided. And as a result, there is no right to bring those into construction. But there's also no way for the people who own those pieces of ground to ever make things right and bring them into an area where we've got useful land that could be used for housing or other purposes And there's no way for them to get it there because someone some time earlier went through an illegal subdivision, a parceling process, rather than a true legal subdivision process. So we consulted with the city attorney because we've had several people tell us that they wanted to develop on these types of parcels. And we don't have any good way forward. And what the city attorney recommended is that we create an ordinance that gives a process by which a parcel that was not legally subdivided can go through something akin to the normal subdivision process, but scaled such that it fits one piece of ground and become a legal buildable lot. And so that's what you see outlined here. There's a number of, the thing that we want to avoid is if we create this alternative process, you don't want someone to say, oh, great, now I don't have to go to the subdivision process. I'll just go down to the county recorder's office, parcel this off, and then use this alternative process. So the goal is basically to make the process such that it requires the same things that the regular process would require. In addition, to incentivize people to go the right way, there's a few things. For example, you have to go, if a piece has been parceled in this way, it sets off a 10-year shot clock before it can go through the process. So it has to be a long-standing error that we're trying to correct rather than someone trying to skirt the regular process. And then the standards, the owner has to be an innocent owner in the sense that the owner was not involved through family ties or through a remunerative process that someone just says, oh, I'll give this to you in an illegal subdivision process, and then you can profit from it and give the money back to me or something like that. That's not allowed. So the owner has to be independent enough that they weren't party to a plan to illegally subdivide. And then if you scroll down just a little bit farther, there's notes that basically say it has to comply with all of our land use ordinances and the things that would be required in the event that it were subdivided. So it has to meet the zoning requirements, lot size, setbacks, access, frontage. If there's no sidewalk, they're going to have to come in and build the sidewalk. If there's no road improvements, then the road improvements will have to be made, all of those kinds of things. Basically, it provides a path forward for someone who came into a piece of ground to still be able to develop on that ground, but it requires them to do everything they would have to do in the subdivision process to get to the point where they could build on it. So, questions or items? How badly did I butcher that?
That's very good.
Okay,
I had a couple of questions when.
please go forward.
When I was reading through this and trying to understand, right now, someone could come in, let's say they have 10 acres, they could come in, if it was an RE1 zone, I'm just because that's an easy one, they could come in and they could pick a particular acre in that, on that parcel and leave the rest as a remainder and only do, I mean, it happens all the time, phase it, but it leaves a remainder parcel and only do the improvements in front of that. Unless I'm understanding something wrong, only do the improvements in front of that particular lot. And then the rest of it becomes a remainder parcel with no potential building right. And I was just trying to understand the big difference that this code change is going to make with that scenario. Now, that would be the scenario one person owns it, and maybe that's the difference.
Wait, run that by me again. So they have
So let's say they have a parcel of land that's 10 acres.
Yeah.
But they come in and they want to create a 1 acre lot that's maybe it fronts the road or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they take the rest 9 acres and they leave it as a remainder parcel and say, I'll develop this in the future.
And then 10 years later, they come in and they just use this ordinance right here.
No, I'm not worried about that so
They-
much.
they
I'm
would
just
come in and
saying
go through the
that
legal
that would be
subdivision
that would be
process at that
legal at
point.
this point. They would do the legal subdivision process.
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand the difference, if that makes sense. Like
Mhm.
they come in and they do that 1 acre, they leave the rest as a remainder parcel. Now, the difference is that one person owns it. But I don't know if you could even kind of expand on the difference that this ordinance would be in the end result from that particular scenario that I'm explaining.
I don't know if there would be a ton of difference for what you're describing to what this person would be required. What we're looking at though, is if you look across the city, you'll find several parcels that are in this same exact instance where they're parceled off 10 years ago or even longer ago in most instances. And like the mayor described, they gave each parcel to a kid or something along those
Right.
lines. And so they're able to come in, but then they have to do the requirements of the subdivision. That's the toughest part is what are they required to do? And it's still, they have to do their fair share at that point. So they have to come in and do the improvements in front of that lot. What you're describing is something that's an issue regardless. So when people come in, they come in to talk to us and they say, I just want to do one lot. That's it. Then there's a remainder parcel, and the remainder parcel, like our city attorney doesn't know where that term came from because that's kind of difficult. Usually what the city requires is that they actually phase it. So they say, hey, I'm going to come in and do a subdivision. Here's one phase, but I have to subdivide the entire parcel or come back in and say, here's all the other lots that I will do, but I'm just going to do phase one at this time. And so
a remainder parcel is not an
don't-
option, or,
what we're hearing from the city attorney, there's no such thing as actual remainder.
well, it's been
parcel.
done a lot.
It has endlessly. We've done it throughout our code.
And that's why I question it is, and so to me, it looks like and I don't necessarily have a big issue with the remainder parcel because the amount required has usually been fair. If it's fair in the beginning, well, if they want to get the rest of their lots, it'll hopefully be fair when they do the rest of it. But
Yeah.
That does change my question for sure. If we're saying remainder parcels aren't allowed.
Not really allowed, but what you do is you just say all the other phases have to come in at that time. So they could do just phase one and one lot would be that first phase. 'Cause We've
And they
never
have-
put a limit on the number of phases or the number of lots. And then we've talked about it, but we've never put a limit on the
Okay.
minimum percentage or number of lots in that. But that's a valid question because it comes up all the time. Someone just wants to take a tiny chunk of their property and take it off and that's it. Yeah, and subdivide it for one kid or someone else. That's a very common issue, what you just described right there, which we didn't consider when we were looking through this. We were looking at the 20 different lots that we know are kind of just sitting there.
Right. And I'm probably aware of a bunch of them.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. The other thing I wanted to throw out, I don't know if when somebody does an improper division of their property, whatever you want to call it. Because they might have a building right, they might have 10 acres and have one building right, they could put one house on it. When you do that, does that one building right disappear? Does it, what I mean? Do we need to address that?
You brought up a very valid point about the building right. And that's what, since you and I have been here and we've talked about this for years, we always went into the notion that there's a lot. So there is one building right. And in discussing with the city attorney, that's actually not true. There's really no building right, even if you just own a chunk of land. You still have to go through the subdivision process. But then he brings up the valid point. You're not subdividing anything at that point. You're trying to create it as a buildable lot. This gives you a path forward, though, for that scenario you just described, where there isn't really a buildable right. Now there is if they just come in and go through this process.
So every parcel doesn't necessarily,
No. Have a
do they have
buildable
to,
right.
so every parcel to build on needs to come to planning commission, city council and get approval, even if it's a single,
They go to
parcel.
city council, planning commission, city council, but they wouldn't go through the full subdivision process at that point. So it'd be a shorter process that's described here.
I was
so-
surprised by
so-
that too, but that was, in fact, when we started looking into that, I asked the same question of the state ombudsman, and he told me the same thing. That there's not Kristen Anderson and I were together asking the question at a league meeting. And he said, buildable right, what? And it's no, there's not an inherent buildable right in that piece of ground until it's formally subdivided and approved. So that was new. That was a new understanding for me, because the assumption that we had offered and operated on as a city in the past before getting that advice was that each parcel automatically came with one buildable right to it. But the legal correction that we've had is a different, steers us towards a different practice that requires this ordinance so that we can entitle those people to be able to build.
Okay, yeah, it's a different way of thinking than how I had typically looked at.
A much
If you
different
looked at
way
it.
than we've operated for years.
Right, and how we've
Likewise.
operated is a good
Yeah.
point. And so we may need to think about that at some point a little bit more, how that, if we can make it more clear, so everybody's on the same page. So.
I agree.
It brings up another question about the 60 slots. That's a very good one, and I hadn't thought about. But when they came through back in the day, they didn't do anything wrong. Everyone came through and just did it through the policies that were there at the city at the time. But this would provide a more direct way for them to do that and come forward and say, here's how you do that. Here's what the improvements are required. And now we actually just make everyone do the improvements at the time. We usually don't waive them. There's a negative with that though as well, because road standards change over time. So you guesstimate where the curb gutter sidewalk goes, and 10 years later you have a new standard, but at least you've done your fair share at that point.
Yeah. And I don't know if the end result is very different. Probably the end result is they go to planning commission and city council, but I think we've still been requiring, even if they had a parcel, we've been requiring some infrastructure and whatever along with it. So the end result is hopefully not much different. It's just maybe a little bit different thinking and process.
Yeah, I think so. So. Yeah.
I mean, I don't, just to speak towards this ordinance, I don't particularly have an issue with anything that I can see. I like the concept that it lays it out and gives us a direction. I think, the reality is, as long as that particular piece of land has got a plan, the only difference is we don't have a long-term plan for the rest of the parcel. And oftentimes it's been passed down so much that if you don't do that, nobody's ever going to come together to solve the problem. And I think that's the issue we have, is bringing everybody together. When we did our subdivision, we were lucky because we got, it was been improperly divided, but we got the other property owner on board
To
to participate. And so it worked out. But I could see if they had said no, we might have had an issue. So anyways, when I say that, I did a subdivision, whatever, 3 years ago or something. And looking back, I see where this could be helpful to somebody.
Cool. Buzz, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I was gonna just move to modify the North Logan City Code Title 12 land use, adding everything listed there in the agenda.
Okay.
So
So we have a motion on the table from Buzzy, a second from Craig. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Hi.
Opposed? All right, motion carries unanimously.
Sorry to make that take so long with
No,
my
that's
questions.
It's a
but-
good question and we want to make sure we get it straight and help us. We all need to make sure we've developed the understanding on which that code change is based. So that's helpful. Next is a modification on water meters. Jordan, do you want to take us through this one quickly?
So this one is pretty easy. It's the highlighted in yellow. So one of the problems we run into a lot is right now we don't dictate the size of the water meter based upon the size of the supply line. And So this change in code would fix that issue. Yeah, so water meter size must match the design size of the service line from the main line to the meter. Must be sufficient size to service the proposed buildings is determined by the IBC and the North Logan City Engineer. Multi-unit HOA development serving more than a single resident must serve the entire development with 1 meter of sufficient size and may not split it into multiple meters. One of the things we've also had in a lot of HOAs is instead of serving off of 1 central meter, because of the cost of a water impact fee, they'll split it into multiple single meters and they're just bypassing it. It doesn't work out. So that's the reason for the code change.
The incentive is if you, the impact fee is based on the size of the water meter. And so if you've got a 4-inch line coming into service subdivision, and then they install a 2-inch water meter, and then the line goes back to 4 inches on the other side, then they pay a significantly lower impact fee than if they just install the 4-inch water meter, which it should be because it's serving a 4-inch line.
Yeah.
Or they'll install 2 or 3 of multiple 1-inch meters, which are cheaper is still, both in terms of cost to acquire and install, as well as on the impact fee front, and then pay lower impact fees. And keeping in mind that the 2 1-inch water meters are not the same size as 1 2-inch water meter. And so this is just to tighten that up.
Yep.
One other issue just along the same lines, and that's something that I learned through the process, was that the scenario that the mayor described of a 4-inch line going to a 2-inch meter to a 4-inch line, it actually wears the meter out. It's beyond the capacity for that meter, and the internal impeller of that wears out over time.
We get inaccurate readings. If it's sized inappropriately, we'll get inaccurate readings.
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much, especially where I'm pretty much not out of here. But on the, is there any way, I look at this and say, it sounds like it should be based on flow, but that's probably hard to do it that way. And I'm just going to give a quick example. Up in Canyon Ridge, the pressure is pretty good now in most of them, but it used to be we would always bump the size up on the opposite side of the meter, not because we wanted more flow, but because the pressure was so low, we were trying to get less pressure loss to the house.
Yeah.
But in all reality, the 3/4 meter was probably just fine. It was just really trying to get the extra, keep the pressure.
And on a home, it's a little different. So past the meter, you can go bigger. It won't overspin the meter. It's the supply coming in that will push the meter past its limit.
Okay, so as long as it's
Once you pass the meter, you can upsize, but it's feeding that meter is the biggest problem. So going from
And it looks like this
to-
change deals with more than a single resident.
Yeah, so a multi-unit, like the mayor explained, so the multi-unit complex, instead of doing 4 2-inch meters, would have to install whatever flows appropriately per their design.
But this is for both, right, though?
Yeah.
Residential and
Multi-unit
multi-residential.
and single. So basically, I mean, it all boils down to if their design dictates that they have to have X amount of flow, their water meter must match that and their supply line must match that. That's pretty much what it can boil down to.
I'll make a motion that we go ahead and accept these changes to the land use, adding these changes to 12D-115.
We have a motion from Craig on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
For a second from Buzzy. Any further discussion? All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thanks, Jordan.
I make a motion, we approve 7.
I'll
This
at
one's
least
very
explain it.
simple.
It says it drops our maximum street grade for down to 10%, which is the custom in most cities. And unless there's some absolute need for the city council to approve something alternatively, then that option is there.
And this brings it in line with our design standards technical manual. They're differing.
It's something we really
standards.
needed to do to put in there. Yeah, I agree. I like it.
So a motion's in order if you guys are that ready to do it, but we can talk about it more if you'd like.
I don't know if I should-
I'll make a motion.
Okay,
that
Roger.
we, approve the changes as outlined.
Roger moves the adoption of the ordinance
Title 12.
modifying the maximum street grades. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Craig, all in favor?
I,
Any opposed? Okay, we're good. Next up is the considering updates to the North Logan City Employee Handbook. I'm going to recommend that we push this. a
second.
week.
Oh, sorry.
Uh,
Thought you were asking for a second.
We put it out for just recently for feedback from employees, and many have had a chance to weigh in with feedback, but not everyone has. And I'd recommend we push this to December so that everyone can, it's kind of disingenuous if we say, please give us feedback, and before people have a chance to really do so, that the city council just approves it. So unless someone moves otherwise, I'm going to move on in the agenda. Okay, next is updates on Civic Center. Basically, this is just straightforward. We went out for an RFP to select an architectural firm. We received 6 applications, and the committee met and reviewed those and decided to invite a number of those firms to come in for a second round for full-blown interviews. A number of them are very strong applications, and whichever direction things end up going, we're going to have a good firm providing that service for us. Because it is an expenditure that will ultimately go over $25,000, that the recommendation of the selection committee will come back before the council in our December meeting for the city council's approval.
Just curious, have we heard back from the firms that have been asked to interview on Monday? Are those all lined up and confirmed?
Yep.
Very nice. City office.
City office,
Okay.
4 o'clock on Monday.
Okay, and with that, we're on to reports. Joni, do you have anything you'd like to report on this evening? Oh, okay. Chief?
I know you guys have tried to hurry this along, so I will try and take the least amount of time. Just a couple updates for the police department. Since we last met, 373 calls of service, 129 traffic contacts. But I'm excited to pass on the additional information, and that is Officer Zachary McComb and Officer Jacob Horrocks graduated the police academy this last Friday night. So I'm happy to tell you that they both passed. They were excited, sent texts. Officer McComb had been provided or given a conditional offer pending his graduation. He successfully graduated, so he started his full-time position with RPD on Saturday night. So he's out dedicating full-time on trying to learn the patrol side of law enforcement. Officer Horrocks will continue as a part-time officer with us in patrol. We'd received 5 applications for full-time employment, and so we hurried and scheduled some interviews. We did have an interview board that met last Friday. 3 of those applicants out of the 5 showed up for interviews. We discussed this as a group afterwards and selected the standout candidate. I then met with that candidate and offered an employment agreement, and he accepted. So Officer McHale Hardison, he'll come to us with 3 years of experience in law enforcement. And he'll start on December 6th. He goes by Cal. So anyways, that's a quick update for the PD, but I'm excited to let you know that we've filled our full-time openings. So very excited.
Great news. Thanks, Chief. Chief Hannick.
Thanks. I'll be briefer than him. Just a couple things. One, I spoke too soon when I said we were full. We actually had a vacancy this week. So we're looking to, obviously for another full-time position. Thankfully, we do have some good candidates within our part-time pool. So we're hoping after the first of the year, we can fill that vacancy. We do anticipate another retirement. So we're going to try to do those both at the same time. Just an update on the vaccine clinic. We are actually doing homebound visits starting this coming week. I think we have scheduled 20 to 30 that we're going to be doing in the Valley. If there's citizens that are homebound that need some kind of a vaccine, either a dose or a booster, they can contact Bear River Health and then they'll probably reassign that to us. That's all I have if you have questions.
Any questions? Appreciate it. Jordan. Marie? Excellent. Thanks, Marie. Yeah, it's always a fun event. Scott? Alan?
Just really quickly, I'm updating this as we speak. We filled the 2 HR intern positions. Those are very part-time. Fantastic news from the police department regarding the officers. I think we're close to filling one of the streets part-time and one of the parks part-time. And so we made some headway in this. We're still a long way from being full in our staffing needs right now, but
After that, it's no more fun.
wow, that's on a recording. That's recorded through this system right now. So
You're on record.
and that's the only thing I have, just other than what Marie brought up regarding the RSVPs, just so we can get a count really quick for food purposes.
Excellent. Thanks, Alan. Buzzy, anything?
RSVP times two for me. Sorry. Trina and I. Is it good food? Is it homemade or catered?
It's just
Catered.
funeral potatoes.
Okay, I'm in for funeral potatoes with some cornflakes on top. The only item I have is a selfish request, and I know Bruce isn't here, so we can't discuss this, but I'm out of town on the 15th and wondering if anybody would entertain bumping our city council meeting to the 8th of December, because I can't miss your last meeting, Mayor, but I may have to in Brad's last council meeting. So
I don't expect it'll be terribly memorable, but
I suspect it will be.
Let's see. What is everybody's availability for the 8th and for the 15th? Because I know Bruce can be back for the 15th. I haven't asked him about the 8th. What are we going to have a quorum on the 15th?
Is that giving up time for some of those subdivisions? Though? I don't know.
with Thanksgiving.
Planning
slamming.
commission's meeting on
Yeah,
the
they'll have
second.
to be ready for planning commission on the
Second.
Okay.
on the
so-
second anyway. Although the first one that we discussed this evening would have to be ready for planning commission on the second. The Smiling H, I doesn't have to go to planning commission, but I think the scope of what we've asked them to generate for us is doable on the timeline for December 8th, as long as we make sure we get with them on that.
I'm available for both, so I'm flexible.
Let me check with Bruce.
Okay.
Just
This sounds bad, but if we have a quorum, do we just go with it? Oh, that's right. It'll be his last one too.
yeah, let me double check with Bruce. It'll be his last city council meeting.
So he
So,
wants his key to the city.
that's.
Yeah, I'd say
I
if he
don't-
can't do it, then definitely, I'll just miss the 15th. But if you guys can and Bruce can, that'd be nice of you.
Let's see what we can do there.
Well, it might, yeah. I can probably make either one. It's, in some ways, there's good things of having those who are continuing on here too. So, yeah.
That's true. Sure. True.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thanks, Buzzy. Craig? Brad? Roger?
Real quick, when does the parking ordinance go into effect? Is that the November 30th?
Yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yeah, 15.
And are they kind of putting out little warning things or how they, because I'm just saying, it's nice to get ahead of it with warnings before the actual first storm hits. And, so just, a thought,
Sure. Yeah,
Did you guys send a message?
it's usually not until we get the snow on a consistent basis that it's hit real hard. We talked about this in the city staff meeting the other day. So
Okay. I just know if it was on kind of.
the 15th, 2 a.m. to
1 a.m. to 5 a.m.
we've been announcing it, so we are
Okay.
trying to
That's
give
good.
plenty of heads up.
The other thing that we'll probably do along those same lines, sorry to interrupt anyone, in talking about this and working with the police department is we'll probably align our dates with Hyde Park's. Ours are a little bit different. I think we start on a different date and we end a little bit too early. We end in like February.
Yeah.
And we're in Cache Valley. There's significant snowfall in March, so we need to discuss that. And Hyde Park has better dates in that regard, so we'll work with them.
Our enforcement mechanism has often been not to ticket on nights where they're not snowing. The challenge we've had with that is on nights when it is snowing are the nights that our police officers who are on duty are most likely to be responding to accidents or helping people, or of course, there are plenty of other law enforcement calls that can come in as well. And so when a call comes in, that a plow driver says, hey, somebody's parked here, please come give them a ticket. That officer may be tied up with other things that have to be dealt with as a higher priority than that parking violation. But that's made things a challenge. And I think this year, while we will start off with warnings, there's a couple of different strategies that we're looking into, but one may well be that we need to start ticketing on nights when it's not snowing, so that the people who ignore the parking laws learn that they have to get their cars off the road overnight. So that when our guy who's on Graves that night is dealing with an accident on Main Street, that they may not, that even if they don't make it up that night, the person still will eventually receive the ticket for wrongful parking.
And I just want to be very clear, the parking enforcement did start on the 15th. And so there could be a citation. We're not going to say that there will be for sure any kind of warnings given to a citizen. I know this is public record, and I just want to be very clear. If somebody does get a ticket, there was no promises that they would have got a warning.
It's officer's discretion, as always, to use their training, knowledge, and understanding the situation. A warning may be more likely early in the season, but is certainly not a guarantee. Thank you, Chief.
So on that note, we talked once about, did we drop it about the plow drivers having some ability to give a citation, and did we decide that was a
Citizen
bad
arrest,
idea?
yeah.
That turned out to be a little more complicated than we
Okay.
thought that it might be. And
It seemed
and
like,
so-
I just wanted to
It's
ask.
incredibly convenient that the person who's driving the plow and is the one who encounters the situation and the hardship could also be the person who writes the ticket and enforces the law. But we made it. We're not there quite yet.
I'm not necessarily saying we should, I just kind
But
of
it-
mentioning what happened there.
Yeah. All right. Motion to adjourn's in order.
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Roger, second from Buzz.